Welcome and thank you for your purchase of the MoreBeer Deluxe Homebrew Starter Kit. I'm going to be walking you through the entire process of making beer at home. Let me start by introducing myself. My name's Vito. I've worked for MoreBeer for 7 years now. I've been homebrewing for over 15 years, and I was actually a commercial brewer for several years as well. So let's talk quickly before we get into the brew day, the different phases of brewing beer. There's the brew day, which is about 4 hours, start to finish, so make sure you allocate enough time for that. There's fermentation, which is two weeks about, and it's kind of hands off at that point. And then there's bottling. Bottling takes about an hour or so, and that's after fermentation is complete. So those are the 3 phases of making beer. So in total, it's gonna take about a month, 3 to 4 weeks from start to finish to make a batch of beer. So, kick back, relax, patience is a virtue. So on brew day, we're gonna be making what they call wort. Brewers make wort, yeast make beer. What wort is essentially, it's a malt sugar water. So the yeast actually convert that sugar water into alcohol, CO2, and finished beer. All right, so let's quickly go over an overview of the entire brew day. What we're gonna be doing is collecting water, heating it, adding steeping grains, getting to a boil, adding our malt extract, adding our hops, chilling our wort, pitching yeast, etc. So again, it takes about 4 hours. We're gonna go through every step. First thing we wanna do is get ready. Just kind of acclimate yourself with everything in the kit, the instructions. So we're gonna give you complete instructions on the brew day. We're also gonna give you a recipe sheet that'll tell you how all the additions, the points you're gonna add them. So go over both those sheets. Also, make sure all your equipment's there, present, familiarize yourself with the equipment, how it works. It's just gonna make your brew day that much easier. So we recommend doing that. If not on the brew day, the day before, something, make sure you go over everything. One thing you might notice, the kit does not come with bottles. You can collect those from local breweries. We don't want the twist type. If you could remove it with a bottle cap remover, then that's the type we want. You don't need those on brew day. Those are after fermentation when we go into bottling. So you've got 2 to 3 weeks before you're gonna need those bottles. So today we're gonna be brewing the American Pale Ale. That's what came with our kit. Your kit might include something else, but essentially the exact same process. The only things that might be different are like the hop additions and what type of items we're using in the steeping, etc. All right, before we get started, I wanna hammer home probably the most important thing in brewing. It's cleaning and sanitizing. They're 2 different things. Cleaning is actually the physical act of cleaning any debris, anything you see that's visually there. Sanitizing is killing or removing the things we can't see. So there's microbacteria. So they're 2 different steps. Before we can sanitize, we need to clean. So we clean, then sanitize. And just make sure we have sanitizing solution handy throughout the entire brewing process. All right, so here we are. We're ready to brew. Today is brew day. We're gonna make some beer. So let's start with collecting water. Water is a key ingredient in brewing, so we want to make sure we use good water. What does that mean? Does your tap water taste good? Do you drink your tap water? If you do, it's probably good water. If you don't like your tap water, we should probably find another source. All right, so we're gonna fill our boil kettle with 3 gallons of water. What we can use to measure that is our bucket. So fill it up with 3 gallons, pop it in the kettle, and then turn that heat on high. Next thing we're gonna wanna do is add our steeping grains. So we're gonna use one of those mesh bags, and then your kit came with your steeping grains. We're gonna add that into the mesh bag, tie it off to the side of our kettle, and let it sit inside there. So what steeping grains are is they're gonna add a couple things. They're gonna add color, flavor, and a little bit of sugar. So we're trying to essentially make like a tea out of those steeping grains. We're gonna want to slowly let them rise, or however fast your burners get you to, but we want that process to take about 30 minutes and or 170 degrees. 170 degrees is when we want to pull out those steeping grains. We don't want them to go above that because you'll start to actually extract tannins and you'll get a bitter flavor to your beer. So we want them to spend at least 30 minutes in there. 20 minutes is okay, but remove them at 170. So that thermometer that came with your kit, make sure you're taking measurements along the way. All right, so now we've hit the 170 degree or 30-minute mark. We're gonna remove those steeping grains. So we're gonna pull them out. The tendency is gonna wanna be to extract as much out of there. That's hot liquid, so we don't wanna grab that and squeeze it. Just let it sit above the kettle, let as much liquid get out of there as you can, and then put it off to the side. So we're gonna move those out of there. So once we remove those, set aside the grains to dispose of, now we're gonna bring it up to a boil. So make sure that heat's on high. This could take, again, depending on the power of your stovetop, this could take a little while, but we're waiting to get to a rolling boil. All right, so now once we've made it to a rolling boil, depending on your altitude, it's a different temperature, but at sea level, it's 212 degrees. But really, we're just looking for the visual sign of a rolling boil. What that means is, you know, the top, there's fissures coming up and the solution is boiling. Then what we're gonna do now is add our liquid malt extract. The first thing we wanna do is turn off that flame source. So turn off your burner on your stove, because when we add this liquid malt extract, it's gonna have the tendency to go to the bottom. It's heavier than water, and we don't wanna scorch it and create any scorched sugar flavors. That's not good for our beer. So turn off the fire, get ready to add our liquid malt extract, open it up. I like to roll it like a toothpaste bottle to try and get all that. We want all that sugar. Don't try and not leave any behind. So we're gonna squeeze that in. If you've got a free hand or you have someone helping you, have them stir the solution to help mix it in. Once we've got it all mixed in and there's none sitting on the bottom, it's all in solution. Since it's a high temperature, it's gonna mix in really easy. Then we could turn the flame back on. Since we've added something that's not, you know, boiling, we're gonna have to get back up to a rolling boil again. Also worth noting here, that corn sugar packet, the bottling priming sugar, do not add that to the kettle. You know, yeah, we want to add sugar, but not that sugar. That's for a later step. All right, so we've added our malt extract. We want to get back up to a rolling boil. At this point, we definitely don't want the kettle covered, so make sure your lid is not on there. The first thing we're gonna see, since we have all that malt extract in there, is what they call the hot break. So you're gonna see this foam that's gonna start rising up. Boil over is one thing you'll hear in brewing. To stop that from happening, lower your flame, give it a little stir. But essentially what's gonna happen is that hot break's gonna rise up and then it's gonna flow down. Once that's happened, once we're after the hot break, then we're ready to add our hop additions. So we're ready to add our bittering hops. Most recipes, including this one, call for a 60-minute addition. So it's a full 1 hour boil. So we're gonna be adding some hops at the 60-minute addition. Why we call these bittering hops is hops have what they call alpha acids in them. Depending on the amount of alpha acids is what creates the bitterness or the IBUs in beer. So we're gonna add our 60-minute addition. Sometimes there's other additions depending on your kit, again, that yours came with. It might have a 20-minute, a 15-minute addition. The ones that come later in the boil or closer to flame out are what we call aroma additions. So they're adding more hop aroma, where the ones that are earlier, 60-minute additions are adding bitterness. All right, so we've got some downtime. We've got 60 minutes or 45, depending on your beer recipe kit. Time to make some sanitizer. So since we're dealing with boiling liquid at this point, there's really no worry about bacteria infections. But once we cool this wort, that's when we're really, so hot side, not as much worried about it. Cold side, everything needs to be sanitized. Anyways, long story short, let's make some sanitizer. So we'll use our bottling bucket, which fill it with 5 gallons of water and add 1 ounce of sanitizer. And that's gonna create your sanitizing solution. Quick note on that, anything, it needs at least 1 minute of contact time. So anything that's gonna touch your fermenter, etc., your spoons or your tubing, make sure that those are sanitized and had at least 1 minute contact time. Don't fear the foam. The tendency is to want to rinse that. You do not want to rinse it. It's a no rinse solution. So get any of the liquid out, but you don't need to rinse out the foam. Let's talk about sanitizing the fermenter, because that's going to be where our beer's fermenting. So, very important to make sure that's sanitized. So I'd put a gallon in there, mix it all around, make sure your spigot's installed, make sure your airlock and top's on there. Again, we want a minute of touching on anything. So run some sanitizer through the spigot, run it through your vinyl tubing that's gonna be touching the finished beer. Anything that's gonna touch that, we want at least a minute sanitized solution. And then collect it back into your bucket, because it's handy to have that around. If you have a spray bottle or something like that, it's nice to fill some of that up to be able to spray anything that's gonna come in contact with it. All right, next step, step 8, is the other boil addition. So again, your recipe kit might have some hop additions. All kits have a wort clarifier. In this case, it's a tablet. Some cases it's Irish moss, which is flakes. What those are gonna do is bind to any of the proteins and heavy things and allow them to settle out in solution. So add those, add your hop additions. If your recipe kit calls for any of the 15 5-minute additions, time to add those now. Let's talk about flame out additions too. Your kit, especially if you have the Pliny kit, that one's packed full of hops. So it's gonna have some flame out additions. Those are after we turn the fire off, then we'll add those. That's really giving you a punchy aroma. You can give it what they call a whirlpool, stick the spoon in there, mix it around, but those are your flame out additions. All right, so we've hit our flame out. We're ready to cool the wort. This is important because we don't want to pitch our yeast at that high temperature. Yeast need to be pitched under 80 degrees. Better if you can get down to 70, 65 even. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna accomplish that two ways. We're gonna do an ice bath for the kettle, for the 3 gallons of wort that we have in the kettle. And then we're also gonna add some cold water to our fermenter. So we're gonna top that off. So let's talk about the kettle real quick. Basically, we're just trying to get water, and ice cold water above that solution level. So you could plug up your sink if you've got a bin or something, fill it up with 7 to 10 pounds of ice, water to help cool that. And it'll probably take anywhere 30 to 45 minutes, maybe even give it an hour of cool down time before we mix it into that fermenter, that sanitized fermenter with the cold water. All right, so we've let the wort chill. Hopefully it's about 130 degrees. That'll mix with that cold water that's in the fermenter, which will get it down to pitching temps. Then we transfer it into there using the sanitized funnel. So make sure we had that sit in sanitizer for at least a minute. Anything else that you're gonna use that's gonna touch it, make sure it's sanitized. We're gonna mix that in to try and get it down to pitching temps. Once we've added our wort and mixed it with the water, it should equal about 5 gallons. There's a line on there, so make sure you're at that volume. If you're a little over, that's okay. That just means you're gonna have a lower original gravity. But if you're below, go ahead and top it off with that cold water because that's gonna help us hit our gravity reading and again, cool the wort and get it ready to pitch yeast. All right, so our next step is gonna be measuring the sugars. This is an important measurement because it's gonna give us what we call our original gravity. So that's your sugars before fermentation. Then we'll also measure our sugars post-fermentation, and that's gonna give us our alcohol level, or ABV. So we're gonna use the spigot to take a sample. We're gonna fill up the hydrometer jar, but don't fill it actually, because we're gonna be putting the hydrometer in there and that's gonna wanna displace liquid. And if we have it full to the top and you put that in, you're gonna lose precious beer. And no one likes to lose beer, that's alcohol abuse. So we'll give it about an inch or two from the top, allow it. Basically, it just needs to float in there. What it's doing is measuring the viscosity of the liquid and it needs to float to do that. So fill about an inch or two from the top, put in your hydrometer. One thing I like to do is give it a little spin. If there's air bubbles underneath the hydrometer, that could throw off your reading. So just make sure there's no bubbles. Once it's rested, we're gonna look for right where the crest of the liquid is, and that's where we're gonna take that measurement. And we'll write that down as our original gravity. All right, so now we know our original gravity. We've made wort, it's time to make beer. So we're gonna pitch the yeast. Yeast are what make beer. They turn that sugar into alcohol. They also produce gas during that time. So first thing, let's talk about pitching that yeast. Sanitize some scissors, sanitize the yeast packet, dunk them in, let them make sure they have at least a minute time, cut the top, try and be quick and keep everything as sanitary as possible at this point. Remove the top with the airlock on it. Pop the yeast in there, close it up, give it a good shake. That's gonna allow to mix that yeast into solution. It's also gonna help oxygenate the wort, which just helps yeast grow. The other thing we wanna do is make sure we have our airlock filled. There's a little line on there. You wanna fill that airlock with sanitizer, or you could even use vodka, things like that. The airlock allows gas to escape, but no nasty bacteria to make its way in. All right, let's talk about where we want to store that fermenter now. Yeast like it, or ale yeast like it, around 65 to 70 degrees. So ideally find a place in your house that fits that temperature range, but also we want to talk about light. You don't want to light struck your beer. Even house lighting could do that, but sunlight definitely. So an inner closet in an inner bedroom, things like that. But we also want to keep the temperature down depending on where you're at. If it's really hot in the summertime, you might consider putting it in a ice bath to help cool it down. During fermentation, the temperature is going to want to rise because those yeast are metabolizing sugar. So again, cool 65 to 70 degree place with not much light. Cool, brew day is completed. We've made wort, yeast are gonna make the beer. Now we're gonna move on to fermentation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about fermentation. Between the first 24 to 48 hours, we're gonna see the first signs of fermentation. So you're gonna see what they call the krausen forming on the top. And it could take 72 hours. Yeast is a living organism, so let them do their thing. You're gonna see that krausen rising, and you're gonna see what they call high krausen in the first. It basically looks like a beer foam on a beer. So it'll be foam. You're gonna see yeast colonies moving their way through the fermenter. It's actually really cool to watch. And then your airlock, you're gonna see gas escaping, or you won't see the gas, but you'll see the bubbles. It'll be bubbling like crazy. So that's active fermentation, and that's the first couple days. Then we're gonna move on to the second stage of fermentation, which is where the yeast go back and they clean everything up. That krausen's gonna die back down. The yeast are gonna start to fall out to the bottom. Airlock activity is gonna slow down, and that's kind of days 7 through 12. So after days 7 through 10, when we've seen fermentation start to slow down, if not finish, we're gonna wanna start taking our first measurement. We're gonna see where that sugar level's at. We wanna take 2 measurements to make sure that it's completed. So, wait till krausen's died down, not much bubble activities, take a measurement. Next day, take another measurement. If it continues to drop, so say you're 10-15 and then you see it 10-12, wait until you've gotten 2 measurements where it's completely stopped. Then we know fermentation is complete. Once fermentation is complete, we're now ready to move on to the next step, which is the bottling process. And we'll go over that once my beer's done fermenting. Also want to remind you, brewing is a science. It could seem very complex, but it's an easy process. What I'm trying to say is we're here for you. If you have any questions along the way, give us a call, email, information's below here. We also have chat on our website. We love talking beer. We have excellent customer service. I love talking beer. Give us a call any point in the process. Brewing, fermentation, bottling, we're here for you. All right, it's been 2 weeks. It's time to bottle condition our beer. We're gonna add the sugar back there, which creates this CO2, this carbonated head, so the fizz in your beer. We're gonna be doing that part of the process. So we'll be adding sugar back in. During fermentation, all that CO2 escapes through the airlock. We've seen those bubbles, but now we wanna capture it in. So we'll be adding that priming sugar and keeping that CO2 in the bottle to give it that fizz that we love. All right, so now let's gather up everything we're gonna need for bottling. So get all your vinyl tubing, your buckets, everything, and then we're gonna move our fermenter. We wanna put it up somewhere kind of high, the edge of a table, because we're gonna use gravity to move it into the bottling bucket. We wanna allow everything to settle out. So as you move it, that krausen, all the things on the side, you're gonna see those kind of knock their way into solution. And we just wanna give them time to settle to the bottom. So we wanna let it sit for at least 20 minutes. All right, so the next step we're gonna do is we're gonna boil our priming sugar. So we're gonna use 2 cups of water. Go ahead and add the 2 cups of water, bring it to a boil. Then we're gonna add the priming sugar. It's that little packet that came with your kit. Mix that in and allow it to cool down. We also wanna cover that and just make sure that nothing's getting in there. Just keep it sanitary, so cover it with some tin foil and set it to the side. We're gonna use that in a couple minutes. All right, the next step we're gonna do is mix some sanitizer. So it's 1 ounce of sanitizer solution to 5 gallons of water. So let's go ahead and do that in our bucket. Let's make sure the valve is closed before we add water in there because we don't want it to spill out on our kitchen floor or wherever we're doing this. So 1 ounce of sanitizer, 5 gallons of water in our bottling bucket. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is grab a sample so we can figure out our final gravity of the beer. So we'll grab a sample, pull it into our hydrometer jar. Again, don't fill it to the top, leave an inch or 2. We're gonna be adding that hydrometer in there, so we want it to float. So we're gonna do that before we move it into the bottling bucket. Take our sample, set it off to the side. All right, next step now, we're gonna go ahead and get our bottling bucket ready and put our priming sugar in there. So first thing, we gotta get that sanitizer solution out of there, so pour that out. Get all the liquid out. Don't worry if there's foam in there, that's fine. Then the first thing we'll do is add that priming sugar, the water and sugar solution we boiled earlier, into the bucket. We want to put it in there first because when we add the wort, it's going to mix and just get a good mixture so we get a primed solution. All right, so the next step we're going to do is sanitize the other equipment that we're going to be using in the bottling process. So that's your vinyl tubing, your bottle filler, and all your bottling caps. After that, we'll go ahead and make sure that the bottling bucket is set up to where gravity could feed from the fermenter into the bottling bucket. We're gonna pull out our sanitized tubing. attach it to the bottom of the fermenter spigot there, and then run it into the bucket with the priming solution in there. I like to put like tin foil over the top of the bucket, just close that up so it's not a big open area. Then run your tube into there. And we're gonna go ahead and open the spigot at this point. Again, make sure your spigot is closed on your bottling bucket and start bringing your finished beer into that bottling bucket. And again, it's gonna mix with that priming sugar to get it ready for the next stage. Next thing we're gonna do is sanitize our bottles. So again, we want them to at least have 1 to 2 minutes of time in that sanitizer solution. So just get them in there, get as many as you can, 5, 10. Then pull them out, let them hang upside down. Ideally, a bottle tree comes in handy at this point. If you don't have one, just kind of drain as much as you can and then place them back up this way. I like to put a little piece of tin foil over the top of them, just because, again, sanitation is key. Just keep them all off to the side, and we're gonna use those in a couple minutes here. So we've moved all of our finished beer into the bottling bucket. We've mixed it in with the priming sugar. Next step, we're gonna wanna move it up to a higher point because we're gonna use gravity to move into the bottle. So go ahead and put it up on the same ledge or counter that you had the fermenter on, and then we're gonna attach our bottling wand. So that bottling wand fits right on the bottom of that spigot. And so pull it out of the sanitizer solution, put it on there, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. All right, so now we've got our filling wand on our bottling bucket. We're ready to fill our bottles. So what we're gonna do is, at this point, we wanna kind of set it up as an assembly line, make sure we've got our bottles ready to go, ready to move over to the next step. It's helpful to have a friend to do the capping portion, but we'll grab our first bottle. We'll go ahead and put it up with the wand in there. There's a little spring at the bottom. So once that's engaged, liquid's gonna flow. We're gonna wanna fill that all the way up to the top, because as we pull out the bottling wand, it's displacing liquid in there, and it'll leave you a nice inch. So go ahead and bring them right up to the top there, and then pull it on, and we're ready to go on to our next stage of capping. All right, we've got a filled bottle. We want to cap it now. So we're gonna grab our caps out of the sanitizer solution, put them on the top there, and then we're just gonna take that bottling capper and push down on there on either side. You're gonna hit a point of tension, and then you go a little past that, and you'll feel it kind of pop in there. Then what I like to do is rinse it off or scrub it off, and you've got a bottle. Once we've moved through and filled our 5 gallons of bottles, you'll get about 50 to 54, depending on how much liquid you had in your fermenter. We can put them back in the case. We want to protect them from sunlight. We don't want direct light. And we also want to put them, just like when you're fermenting the beer, we want this to be a steady temperature place, because we're actually having a second fermentation, and that's what's creating the carbonation and making that beer fizzy. So put them back in the case, find a nice cool place that's out of direct sunlight, and we're going to let them sit for another week to 2 weeks. All right, so our bottles are safely away, getting ready to create their carbonation. So what we'll do is we're gonna take our last measurement here. So we're gonna take that last gravity reading. This is called our final gravity reading. So initially in the brewing process, we took our original gravity. Now we're gonna take our final gravity to calculate our alcohol by volume, or ABV. So our original gravity minus our final gravity multiplied by 131 gives us our alcohol by volume. All right, so let's talk about conditioning. I said take about a week or two. It really depends on its time and temperature and the yeast themselves. But after 2 weeks, what I like to do is take one of those bottles, pop it in the refrigerator, let it sit overnight for 24 hours, then pull it out and crack it open. If you've got a great carbonation to it, if it's bubbly, fizzy, great head on there, those are all ready to go ahead and move into the refrigerator and lock in that carbonation profile. All right, so we've got finished beer. We've taken it from grain to glass. Time to crack these open, share them with friends, family, and enjoy beer. Cheers. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. Love this hobby. Be sure to subscribe to MoreBeer channel for more videos like this, where we talk about beer, brewing, enjoying beer. Cheers.